Hi, everyone. My name is Peter. This is Advanced Magazine, and I'm the managing editor of Advanced Magazine. I'm joined today by Linda.
Hi, everyone. I'm the senior editor of Advanced Magazine, and we are here today. We're very excited to present our new feature this year.
Right. It's called The Art of English. It's a new feature just this year, and each month it features an excerpt from a classic of Western literature, English language, Western literature, maybe even poetry, but we'll stick to literature for the time being. We'll see how it goes.
Yes.
But we wanted to make a video supplement, little extra material here for the feature that you can look at, that you can watch and refer to as you read the feature or after you've read the feature yourself, just to get some deeper thoughts about it and about the vocabulary in it.
Yeah, and to summarize this feature, I think our deck says it really well, that it's showcasing the beauty of the English language within great works of literature.
Right. And we've got certainly a great work of literature to start you off with here.
Yes, we do.
And that is a novel called Pride and Prejudice by the English author Jane Austen. Linda, tell us a little bit about Pride and Prejudice.
Yes,
and Jane
I'm
Austen.
really excited to talk about Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice because, you know why, Peter? She is one of my favorite authors. And this actually is one of my favorite books. And this particular scene is one of my favorite scenes in all novels. And it centers around Elizabeth, who is the main character in this book. And here we see her, we get into her thoughts. And she's actually one of my favorite characters in all of novels and characters. And so she is just a really strong, independent woman. And she is unique to this period because, well, we will talk about that, actually. We will get into that. But she lives in a society where there are very strict customs, but she's different. And we'll see how she's different.
Yeah, she kind of has a pushback on those customs in her spirit, at least. But what we wanted to do today and each time we join you for Art of English is to actually read the passage for you so you can hear some of this fairly elevated English language and just get a sound for how it hears, hope maybe after you've read it, or you can read it now for the first time with us as we read it for you.
Right.
So,
and we should mention that Jane Austen was British, and this takes place in Great Britain, in the UK.
Right, so don't be surprised if you hear a little British accent in some of the reading that we're about to do for you. We were talking about this just before we went on the air here, and I think what we'll do is it's the way that the excerpt is set up. There's a narrator who says this happened, and then Elizabeth, one of the characters, speaks. And so we thought that I would read the narrator parts, and then we'd have our own Elizabeth right here in the studio to give voice to Elizabeth's thoughts. So I think that's how we'll go here. So let's go into our reading. And if you do have your magazine with you, this is the part that begins right there, the second full paragraph, if you want to follow along. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. In spite of her deeply rooted dislike, she could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection. And though her intentions did not vary for an instant, she was, at first, sorry for the pain he was to receive. Till, roused to resentment by his subsequent language, she lost all compassion in anger. She tried, however, to compose herself, to answer him with patience when he should have done. He concluded with representing to her the strength of that attachment which, in spite of all his endeavors, he had found impossible to conquer, and with expressing his hope that it would now be rewarded by her acceptance of his hand. As he said this, she could easily see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. He spoke of apprehension and anxiety, but his countenance expressed real security. Such a circumstance could only exasperate farther, and when he ceased, the color rose into her cheeks, and she said,
In such cases as this, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. It is natural that obligation should be felt. And if I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you certainly have bestowed it most unwillingly. I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone. It has been most unconsciously done, however, and I hope will be of short duration. The feelings which you tell me have long prevented the acknowledgement of your regard can have little difficulty in overcoming it after this explanation.
All right, that was from Chapter 34 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, we are not going to be with you a whole lot of time today, but we did want to take some time just to think about and talk about these three discussion questions that you can see right at the end of the passage there. And there's additional vocabulary down at the bottom of the page for some of those harder words in the passage. But let's look at one of the questions, starting with the first one. What can we learn about social manners at that time? Linda, what can we learn?
So I mentioned earlier that this period that Jane Austen lived in and her character Elizabeth, they had very rigid customs. There are very strict social customs that they had to abide by, especially when it came to male and female roles. So a woman, she was supposed to get married and have children and take care of her family. And there was a lot of inequality. There still is, but back then it was much more. So
it was much more institutionalized then. It was part of just the way things were.
Exactly.
People didn't question it.
So it was a very patriarchal society where the man or the husband had all the power. And so as a woman, as a wife, her job was just to take care of the household. But we see in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth is quite independent. She is very strong, and she has a mind of her own. And we see this when Darcy, this wealthy, established man, comes and proposes to her, and she rejects him. And she does it in such a way that, it's such an eloquent rejection.
Yes.
But she does it very pridefully, as, our title suggests. There is a lot of pride and prejudice going on. And on her part, she is very proud in rejecting him. And she doesn't really feel sorry about it, although she does mention that she should feel sorry. Again, these are these social customs that she should be abiding by, but she rejects them.
Right. And see, there's a lot going on. You see, as we're listening to Linda talk about it and as we're reading it on the page, there's a lot going through her mind. It's not just she says, I don't want to marry you, get out. That's what great literature can do, whether in English or in any language. You see how in that first paragraph, it starts off, the author Jane Austen starts off telling us that for Elizabeth, in spite of her deeply rooted dislike of Darcy, she could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection. So as much as she doesn't like the guy, at the same time, he is a wealthy, kind of good-looking guy, and it's she's got to balance these two, this repulsion and this attraction at the same time.
Well, she has to show a certain amount of respect. So she's still trying to respect him because of his status and because of his wealth. And of course her family, especially her mother, would love her to marry this guy because that would bring up the status of her family. And also they would share in his wealth. Yeah. So there's a big practical side to this that her family is not insensible to either. But this novel is called Pride and Prejudice for a reason. And this is even one of our discussion questions. Let's just jump briefly to number 3 here, since we are talking about Pride and Prejudice. And the question here says, where do we see an example of either pride or prejudice in this excerpt? Now,
pride meaning very full of oneself, very overly confident in an unpleasant way, and prejudice meaning to prejudge, to think you know someone when you don't really know them
or have
well.
preconceived thoughts.
Thoughts
about someone. And so for the first part, pride, you said someone who is full of himself or herself, and that can be used to describe Darcy in the paragraph in which he's being described.
Yeah, it's a wonderful paragraph. Darcy, he's proposing marriage to her, and he concludes his proposal with representing to her the strength of that attachment to her, that affection for her, that in spite of all his endeavors, all his attempts, all his efforts, he had found impossible to conquer. So he felt attraction to her, and he tried to conquer that attraction because a man is not led about by his heart, just led about by a pretty woman. He must conquer that attraction, and he felt that he could not.
Well, and also it's because of her status, because she was beneath him, that he could fall for such a woman. He was fighting those emotions and those affections. He didn't want to feel this, but now no longer can he hold them back.
Right.
He proposes to her, and he expects her to just accept his proposal. So we see here that we could see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. He spoke with some apprehension and anxiety, but his countenance, his face, his expression expressed real security. So he was very confident that she would say yes. There was no doubt in his mind. Even though he seemed a little bit insecure, he wasn't insecure.
Right. And that's a form of prejudice. It's both pride and prejudice right there in the Darcy character in that moment. Pride in thinking, yes, so this lower class than me woman will be so flattered that I am proposing marriage to her that she will say yes without me having to really go to much effort at all. And that's a form of prejudice. It's both pride and prejudice in deciding that he knows exactly who she is and what she does with her heart and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and he's stepping down a level to her level to propose to her.
Right. You could almost call it pride, prejudice, and condescension. Condescension when we lower our normal speech or the level of our thoughts to someone else, like a child usually, so that they understand. But obviously, a fellow adult isn't a child, and to be condescending like that is really quite insulting.
Yeah, he's basically looking down on her.
Right. So then this takes us nicely back to question 2. How does Elizabeth communicate her deeply rooted dislike of Mr. Darcy?
Yeah, we see that in the language that is used. So we see in the first line her deeply rooted dislike, and we see a few lines later, she's trying to feel sorry for the pain that she's going to cause in rejecting him, but she's roused to resentment, that he makes her feel this anger, and she eventually loses all compassion in anger. She's so angry that she doesn't have any compassion for him anymore. And she really feels strongly about this. And we go on in the paragraph after the next, such a circumstance could only exasperate farther. So when you're exasperated, you're very annoyed, you're irritated and frustrated that you don't even know what to do. So she's all pent up with this frustration and this exasperation, that she's feeling toward him.
Yeah. To exacerbate, just for the record, means to make a situation more of what it already is. Like if children at a birthday party are making a lot of noise, we would say that when the clown arrived, the noise level was exacerbated. It was increased. But exasperate here means to become more and more annoyed and irritated.
Right. So her exasperation was exasperated.
It was exacerbated. Yes. It's tricky, this English language. But, and I love the way she does actually do it, because what she doesn't do is just go, blah, Instead, she uses language.
Yes.
And she just, the author says the color rose into her cheeks. You imagine her getting all flushed with anger like we do sometimes when we're really upset. But instead, she just says, in such such cases as this, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, the sentiments expressed. So she is like deconstructing, taking apart the social custom that she knows she's expected to honor in order to communicate how deeply she dislikes the man. She's saying, she doesn't just say no, thank you. She says, custom, the way we conduct ourselves in this society requires me to, it's almost like listening to a lawyer. She's speaking in
very eloquent.
Legalese.
Yeah. And the way she uses language is just so wonderful. And she doesn't get angry like you said. She's not visibly angry except in the red that you see in her cheeks. But from her language, you can tell exactly how she's feeling. But she keeps her composure. She doesn't blow up. She keeps her composure and tells him through her words exactly how she feels.
Right. And that's one reason why British English in particular is often very elegant, very expressive, more so than American English on average, because of a British cultural thing, which exists to this day, of restraint. Mm-hmm. Holding oneself together, not being emotional, not being all expressive, but instead focusing that emotion through language. And thus, British English in particular is often much more refined than American English or any other English really that you'll find around the world, and thus very much more expressive and can say a lot and express a lot using words rather than just sheer emotion or volume of voice or anything like that.
And this is rooted in the culture, in these social customs. That it's necessary to maintain your composure. You don't lose it.
Right. That's how you fall from grace, so to speak. That's how you embarrass yourself in this culture, is by, I have no words, I'm so, no, you always have words, just like she does in rejecting the prideful proposal of marriage that Mr. Darcy is making for you here. She says, I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone, to have made, created an occasion for pain for someone. It has been most unconsciously done, however. I mean, it's almost funny, the degree to which she goes. And I hope will be of short duration. That's one way that we can sometimes, that certain people can kind of twist the knife in, is by deliberately holding back and just saying, I'm so sorry I had to break your heart. I hope it doesn't last too long. Cheerio,
Yes, saying it in such a polite manner, makes it even more painful.
Yeah, even more, twist that knife in kind of thing. Anyway, we hope that this has whetted your appetite to read the entire book of Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, if you haven't read it, please go read it.
Yes, it really is a classic. It has language like this, which again, it's tricky at first when you start reading it. It's tricky for non-native speakers because nobody speaks like this, in real life. People do it in books, but when we see them speaking like this in books, it just reminds us of how much language, particularly English, can convey, can communicate, and it'll also give you a little window into certain kinds of English language cultures that exist in the world today.
It will.
I think for today, we'll wrap it up and say bye-bye. We'll be back next month with that month's feature of The Art of English, a new excerpt from a new book for you to read. But for today, I'm Peter.
I'm Linda.
Saying bye-bye and
Bye.
happy reading.